When you are looking to bring on a guest, that takes time. And in that time, you could create upwards of 4 to 5, maybe even more, depending on the length of your episodes, of your own solo based content. When you do that, think of the freedom that is now in front of you. There you are, and here I am, and welcome to episode 2 of Solo Podcasting Simplified. I am Jason Sircone, and wherever you're at in the world, whether you're watching me on YouTube or you're tuned in to Solo Podcasting Simplified on your favorite podcast app, please take a minute to click that follow button, click the subscribe button. Do not miss any new content that is set up to come your way. Today, we're going to talk about the great debate: solo content versus guest content. Which approach is better? And ultimately, who wins based on that content choice you make? Allow me to answer the second question right now. Who wins? Your audience wins. That needs to be your mindset. Whether you're creating content that features guests or you're creating content that's solo, you have to think about the impact you're bringing your audience and the value that you're delivering to them. When you bring them what they seek and you start to bring them that transformation that they're looking for, that's going to get them invested in your content, and that's going to get them turning to people in their circle and recommending that they listen to you as well. So if you have 20 people in your audience listening to your show and all 20 of them turn to somebody in their audience and they say, "You've got to listen to this podcast. It's changing my life. I'm learning so much. You are going to love it." If that person takes their advice, which most likely they will, because we always listen to recommendations from our peers and our friends, right? Your 20 becomes 40. That's our math lesson today, kids. That exponential growth is huge. And that's what will help your podcast take off. That's going to bring more people into your circle. And that's going to help you achieve those brand objectives that you have set for your podcast initiatives. So let's talk about the difference and the benefits and even some of the disadvantages of having a guest on your show. Now, if you hop back to episode 1, and if you haven't listened to that, you should, because it's going to provide some context for today's conversation. When you bring a guest on your show, they're going to be the focal point. They're going to be positioned as the thought leader. Now, if you're just getting started and you haven't really established yourself, that can be a great way to create content that raises your notoriety. But at the same time, the focal point is going to be on that guest. Now, you can contribute points and add to the conversation and make it compelling and engaging, because, again, that's going to get the audience invested. That's what you should be striving for with each episode when you have a guest across from you. But the focal point is going to be on them. That could be an advantage. It could be a disadvantage. If you are looking to position yourself as the thought leader in your niche, solo episodes are going to help you do that more effectively because the attention is going to be on you. If you go back to episode 1, I talked about that in more detail. And believe me, I'll be talking about it in a lot of detail on future episodes because it's one of the most important aspects of this solo approach. A guest can bring value to your show. They can help you create great content that you share with your audience in a number of different ways. One of the big benefits of having a guest on your show is that you get to tap into their audience. They have X amount of people that follow them, whether it's through their podcast or through their social networks or on their email list, whatever the case may be. You have an opportunity to get in front of that audience with your show. What you hope to happen is that when they hear that content, they say, "Wow, this is great. I'm going to come and listen to that podcast as well." Now, will every single listener do that? No, because a lot of those people are tuning in just to listen to that guest. So you may see a little bit of an influx in your numbers, but will it bring complete rise every single week? No. But having that guest does give you exposure, and big things can happen from that. But what you also run the risk of, to flip this on its side, maybe on its head, depending on what your perspective is, if you create content for that person to share and they do nothing with it, which is unfortunately one of the biggest plagues on the podcasting space, what happens then? Well, nothing, because if they aren't putting this in front of their audience, they really don't know how to find it unless they find you first. So if the guest doesn't take that step to share their content, it's really all for naught. Do you have content for your network? Yes. But that's content where the spotlight is split. Instead of going that route, why not keep the spotlight on you? See the little point counterpoint thing that I'm doing with myself right here? Again, talking about the advantages, getting that opportunity to tap into a new audience can be very effective if it's done right, and if that guest, of course, takes the step to share with their audience, which they should, because this is content that you created for them and it builds up their thought leadership. Why guests don't want to share content is beyond me, but that's a story for another day. Now, another benefit of having a guest on your podcast is the fact that you don't have to carry the conversation yourself. As you see, this is me. I'm talking to the camera, I'm speaking into the microphone, and it's just me. I've gotten very comfortable doing this. In fact, I love this approach much more than having those conversations. And to give you an idea of how much that means to me, I love having conversations with people. It's one of my favorite things to do because you can learn so much about a person, and so many more things can be discovered from having an engaging, captivating conversation. That's how strongly I feel about podcast guesting, because I still use that for my own brand building initiatives. I recommend it to everyone to build their brand, but when it comes to creation, I'm more on the solo side because I feel this is a much more dynamic way to build a direct connection with you specifically, watching and listening at this moment. So you do have somebody on the other side of the microphone. It can take some of that pressure off of you. You get to have that great conversation. That can be incredibly powerful. But it all comes back to how you're positioning yourself within your brand and within your niche. Do you want to be the thought leader that everyone turns to, that everyone is coming to for guidance, that everyone is giving money to for the solution that you have for them so they can get the transformation they seek? If the answer is yes, and I'm going to put all the money in my wallet on the fact that it probably is, you stand a better chance of doing that if you're positioning yourself and yourself alone without having that conversation with a thought leader. Now, you're going to notice on this podcast, it's not going to be just me every single episode. I will feature episodes where I'm bringing thought leaders on to have those conversations. And the reason I'm doing that is because, A, like I said, I love having those conversations. And I will say they're unscripted. I mean, we're just having incredible banter. And the idea behind it is to bring you value. And that's the other part of this. I'm not going to hold back any type of value on this show because I just want to keep the spotlight on myself. I know that there are thought leaders out there who have leveraged solo podcasting and use it to build their brands. And I want their perspectives on this show because the goal is to help you do the exact same thing. If there are people out there that can bring value to your audience in that capacity, you do not want to keep them away from your show. But at the same time, the majority of your content can be focused on you through the solo approach. Can a guest help alleviate some of the pressure in the conversation? Absolutely. But make sure that as you bring them on and give them that spotlight, that it's going to be a win-win-win. Win for you, win for that guest, and a win for your audience. If you're a results-driven coach or consultant that really wants to sink your teeth into solo podcasting and produce multifaceted content that elevates your brand in undeniable ways, the Solo Podcasters Mastermind is calling your name. This fully interactive 60-day mastermind was built to help you develop the right mindset for podcasting, hone your solo podcasting skills, build a well-oiled podcast infrastructure to grow your show, and give you access to support from other solo podcasters. You'll even get assistance with post-production and have your show launched in less than 60 days. Get all the details and register to be part of the next Solo Podcasters Mastermind session at jasonsircone.com/mastermind. Now, I mentioned guests not sharing that content. That absolutely is a big disadvantage. The biggest disadvantage that I see, and I did talk about this briefly on episode 1, so if this is a rerun already in episode 2, I apologize, but you do lose a lot of time. And it's not loss of time, maybe that's the wrong way to define this, but when you have a guest or you want to have a guest, there is a process in place. Any podcaster knows that you have to go through a big checklist of items to make sure that any guest that you bring on the show is A, right for your show, and B, fully prepared to bring their A game and understand your expectations. This takes time. And if you've never done this, if you've never had a guest podcast, you've never done podcasting at all, let me give you a brief rundown of what you have to do. You have to find a guest that you feel would be a good fit. They fit your dynamic. They would bring some voice, some expertise, something that will impact your audience. Now you have to communicate with that person. So it's emails, it through DMs, is it a phone call, whatever. That takes a minute, right? You have to wait for them to respond and say, yes, I want to be on the show. Okay, great. Now you've got that step up. Now we got to schedule them. Now you schedule them, and that could be months down the road because some people are very far booked out. Once you get them scheduled, now you've got to let them know what you expect of them. This is what we're doing. Please don't come on and sell. I want you to bring value. I know you got that, blah, 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 blah. You got to let them know, at least if you're doing it right, that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that when they show up, there is mutual respect and they understand what they're bringing to your show. So again, everybody wins. Once you've got all that in place, now you've got to prepare. You want to make sure that you know who this person is. You want to have some questions that are riveting and compelling and will captivate the audience, that will hopefully get great stories to come from your guest. That takes time. And once the episode is complete, now you have to do all that post-production work. You've got to create marketing assets for them. Now, on the solo shows, you're going to be doing that anyway. So maybe that's not the biggest in regards to time consumption, but to put a bow on this and to get to my point, when you are looking to bring on a guest, that takes time. And in that time, you could create upwards of 4 to 5, maybe even more, depending on the length of your episodes, of your own solo-based content. When you do that, think of the freedom that is now in front of you. Because let's say you do one episode a week. Maybe it's a half an hour episode, but you've now created 5 or 6 to where you could schedule those out and you could unplug from your podcast for a couple weeks to recharge. Use that time to focus your attention on other priorities within your brand. Use that time to cultivate new ideas for future episodes. Batch recording is a big component to a successful podcast. If you do this in the solo format, not only do you batch record and give yourself that ability to schedule ahead, but you also give yourself freedom to put your attention on other aspects of life, not just business, but of life. Because maybe this is going to allow you to take some time away, maybe take a long weekend, maybe take a whole week, take a few weeks, whatever. The world is your oyster. But if you are constantly spending time preparing for your next episode, it's incredibly time consuming. And again, if you've never done this, ask any podcaster and they'll tell you. I'll be the first one to tell you we're nuts because we're doing it every week. Some of us do it twice a week, 3 times a week. Some podcasters do that every single day. You have to be prepared for that, and you have to manage your time appropriately in order to do that consistently. And to talk about pod fade real quick, pod fade is when a show starts and then just disappears and the producers stop making new content. It can be for a number of reasons. One of the big reasons is burnout. And that burnout can happen from trying to maintain that schedule of preparing for a new guest or multiple guests each and every week. You don't want to get locked into something that's going to suck up your time and make you hate producing a podcast. That's one of the biggest takeaways I want you to take from this episode. If you are going to bring guests on your show, you have to make sure that you're setting yourself up to do it the right way. And that's why I advise going the solo route so you maintain control and you don't have to worry about all of that prep work. All of that prep work could be done into putting some bullet points together for strong messages that you want to share that come directly from you. Not only does that save you time and give you that freedom, but it also strengthens your thought leadership in your niche and builds that undeniable connection with your listeners. That is impossible to duplicate or replicate anywhere else. And if you do this effectively, you're going to have a solo podcast production that not only carries your brand to new levels, but gives you content to share on other platforms to make an impact there as well. Now, as we get close to wrapping up today, I should have thrown this disclaimer on the front of the episode. Maybe I should even stamp it on the cover art so it's always seen. But in no way, shape, or form am I downplaying the value a guest can bring to a podcast. I love podcast guesting. I love making those connections and making those guest appearances and networking on a high level with those content creators. It's an incredible way to grow your brand. It's an incredible way to raise awareness around your new podcast. I highly recommend it as an initiative to get the word out as you launch your show, even if it is solo based. But you have to understand, it's all about the objectives that you have in place. As I said earlier, if you're brand new and you're looking to get some notoriety in your niche, welcoming some experts and thought leaders from your niche onto your show to talk about those various aspects of what you do within your brand can help you get that notoriety. But if you are more established, or if you just want to hit the ground running and start building yourself up as the expert, as the resource, as the thought leader that people are looking for to get the transformation they seek in your specific area of expertise, a solo podcast is going to help you do that much more effectively. So can guests bring value to a podcast? Absolutely they can, but it's all about your brand objectives. And if you want to make a huge splash right out of the gates, solo podcasting is the way to make that happen. That is going to bring the curtain down on episode 2 of Solo Podcasting Simplified. I hope you had a great time. I know I did. I'm Jason Sircone, and until we meet again on episode 3, good talk. See you out there.